Interestingly enough, there were, and I actually sat down with a couple of friends and we started to think about the number of women's wear stores there were on King Street, and came up with the number 18. So King Street East was a real center for fashion. I mean, these involved everything from sportswear to coats, suits, and dresses, and just about everything that a woman shopper would want in the way of clothes. So it was a real marketplace and a very successful place for the merchants. And by the way, these 18 were all Jewish. I think there might have been another, like one or two that weren't, but not included in that number. So this was quite a center, as I say. My personal or family involvement on King Street started back in 1920 when my parents moved here from Stratford, Ontario, where my father's family had settled. And they bought a millinery store, which was called the Chicago Millinery, which was on King Street East, down past Ferguson Avenue. And this was their first venture into business. My brother was, my late brother was about a year old at that time, and they lived upstairs over the store. This business grew to a small chain of 6 or 7 stores, mostly in downtown Hamilton. But, you know, as things have a way of doing, they change. And you find that millinery, that's ladies' hats, there was a certain point where women were wearing their hair up in a beehive, and there was no room for a hat anymore. And there was a cardinal in Quebec who said, you don't have to wear hats to come to church. So the whole hat business sort of collapsed. I don't think it's ever really revived. So we switched into, first of all, ladies' wear, and finally bridal. And Leeds of Hamilton was a bridal shop at the corner of King and Catherine for 40-odd years. Along with this King Street East, you know, businessmen's phenomenon was like as these people became a little more affluent and sort of formed a bit of a merchant class in the Jewish community, they moved out of the original center of the city area where the Jews were really a part of that early immigration. That would have been, you know, in the early 1900s, actually, although some later. But the movement was to the East End at the time. And there was quite a community of Jewish people in the area between Sherman Avenue and Gage. And this, you know, most of these people were people who were in retail business. Probably all of them were in the retail business. This sort of became a stepping stone, you know. And then, of course, their children became professors or doctors or lawyers or whatever. But this was the retail area was an area where a person could get into it without too much investment, and we seem to have, as Jews, a feeling for it, you know. Not only the retail, but the wholesale and manufacturing areas were usually controlled by Jewish firms. So King Street East was, as I say, it was very interesting. And just to name some of the people who had stores there, there were the Rolfs. They had Rolfs ladies' wear. There was ourselves, Leeds of Hamilton. There was Wasserman, Saul Wasserman and his son Marv started out as an electrical store, became a furniture store. Of course, Adler's was a big furniture store there. Rafel Mac, very high class ladies wear. There were a few of them. Liberty Ladies Wear, which was near the corner of Catherine and King. Mo Levy was the proprietor there, and that was another high-class ladies' wear. And Minden's was another stalwart on King Street. They were on the south side of the street, up very close to James. So I could name many others, but you know, these are things that just sort of pop into my head. Now, you know, that's, if you want to know more details, please ask me.
If you can think of others, if you remember a couple of others,
well,
take the list. I don't care.
Sure, I have.
Great.
Okay. These are, oh yes, Ben Silvert had a store called the Sally Silver Shop. Willie Roden had the sample shop. Mona Snyderman, Bar Sportswear, Ab Walters, Faye Jackson's. Got to mention Faye Jackson's. She was a terrific retailer. And she was really the first bridal shop in Hamilton. And she was so forward-looking, and she promoted her business in a very professional way, and even advertised in the big American bridal magazines. So they were, I mean, she had a very professional operation. Rainbow Shops, I think that's the only one that's still going. And that was the Ginsbergs. The Ginsbergs, they were the original people who ran the Rainbow Shop. It was passed on to their son, Joel, and his nephew now runs it. So it's, I think he says it's over 80 years old, and I believe it's true. And Esther Schechter, who was one of the great Garshowitz family, had a store down there. Bube Sportswear, another beautiful store. It was on King Street West. And so on, you know, but these were they were not only interesting from the standpoint of being all together, but from the standpoint of quality and the merchandise they carried, they were first rate.
And you knew each other. You all knew each other.
Oh yes, we all knew each other. And as I say, many of them lived in this East End enclave. And if you remember, you know, they, I suppose it was because of the fact that there were a lot of Jewish people down in this area. When I say a lot, probably 30, 40 families, you know. And then, of course, there was the original Jewish settlement in the downtown area around McNabb, Cannon Street, that whole area, Hess Street, and so on. But because they wanted to service both these areas, I guess that's why they built the Jacob Goldblatt Memorial Community Center somewhere in between. It was close to Wentworth Street. And that served the community well. But of course, what happens, as happens with all different immigrant communities, there was a movement, and of course, the movement became to Westdale and Dundas. And now it's coming to Ancaster too. But the whole focus of the Jewish community moved west. So it left the community center sort of high and dry. Just a couple of thoughts about living in the East End. Of course, most of us went to Adelaide Hoodless School and Central Collegiate, which was the collegiate that eventually burned down on a very spectacular fire. And we went to Hebrew school, mostly not at the Talmud Torah, but at a a little school run by a private teacher. His name was Mr. Berneker. But I would have to think that he was part of the mainstream of Jewish teachers in that he taught with a stern, he taught with a big stick and a stern attitude. But it didn't help him a heck of a lot because the kids were rambunctious, and they'd all of us had spent a day at school, and we come there more to have fun and to make him angry at us.
Where was this?
This was on King Street East. The building became the Germania Club, just at the foot of Proctor Boulevard. Sure. And I remember one of the little fun things that happened there. I think everybody has stories about the haters. I had a chemistry set, and there was a formula in there for stink bomb. So it was sort of in the summer or early fall, and I took this little vial of smelly stuff and put it on the windowsill. The window was open, it was blowing in. And of course, his reaction was, who did that? Not who put the bomb there, because he hadn't noticed it, but who created the odor. But a poor man, you know, it must have been a very tough living for him. But he did prepare us for our bar mitzvahs.
How come I've never heard about this? We've heard about the Talmud Torah on Vine.
Right.
But no one ever mentioned this place.
Well, there was more than one, I believe. And I remember there was another one that was on, I believe, Victoria Avenue, run by Mr. Shapiro. I think when Berneker left, I went there for a while.
How many were you? Were you a bunch of guys?
Oh, I would say about a dozen.
Really?
About a dozen, yeah.
What synagogue were you affiliated with?
Answer Sholem. But I mean, they weren't, they were from different, more Beth Jacob and Answer Sholem particularly, yes.
When did Ottawa Street get to be?
Well, yes, that was another important business street at a certain time in our history. You know, it became. I think it was more of a place where people went to shop for fruits, groceries, and so on. But as a matter of fact, we had a store on Ottawa Street as well, you know, with millinery and furs. So there was quite a few Jewish firms down there too. I'm not as familiar with that as I am with King Street.
The Ottawa had all the furniture stores. Didn't they have Adler's on Ottawa? And didn't Sonny Eisenberg have?
That's right. Yes, you're quite right. Furniture was really the big. You're quite right there. The furniture was a furniture street. It has subsequently become fabric street.
Tiles.
Yes, and that sort of thing. But I mean, there are people come from out of town. Even buses come today to shop for fabric. But at that time, yes, there were a lot of furniture stores. I can't name them all, but I bet you there was a half a dozen of them on the street. Yes, it was again, as King Street was the clothing center, Ottawa Street was the furniture center.
I'm wondering, you're talking about all the high-end shops on King Street. So, and when you think of Hamilton in those days, you think of like industrial steel town. But obviously people had money if there were so many high-end stores on King Street.
You know, and we're not talking about prosperous times. By and large, the 30s were bad times, of course. But the women got dressed up. They wouldn't go outside, or they wouldn't go downtown, that is, dressed in anything other than a dress and a coat if it was in season, and a hat. And it was, I mean, when you walked down King Street or James Street on a weekend, there were crowds of well-dressed people. And I still miss that, you know. It's just the accent on being fashionably dressed has changed so much, you know, because today it's very, very, very casual. And from a personal viewpoint, when I see a woman dressed in, you know, as perhaps a businesswoman would be today, you know, in a nice suit or a nice dress or whatever, and especially with a hat, I get a real kick out of it. I guess it's part of my background, you know.
Now, you grow up in Hamilton?
Yes.
When you grow up in Hamilton, are most of your friends Jewish or?
You know, they were mixed because we had, I mean, I lived on a street that I think we were probably the only Jewish people. But in the neighborhood, there were, you know, a dozen Jewish families. So I think, you know, we sort of, we had good friends in the general school community, and also in the, of course, the Jewish community particularly.
What street did you grow up on?
Sorry?
What street did you grow up on?
Spadina Avenue. That's not the famous Spadina from Toronto, but in Hamilton. In Hamilton, there were streets like St. Clair, Proctor Boulevard, Spadina, Carrick.
Never heard.
I know where you're talking about, like, where around Sherman Avenue, right?
Yes, east of Sherman, mostly east of Sherman. But these streets all had a smattering of Jewish people. And they were sort of like, you know, middle class, merchant class people. And there was a great, another thing that isn't seen very much today is there was a real social life between the Jewish, the people who were formed this class. They'd get together and they'd play poker, or they'd get together and have an evening together, or they'd go out for, certainly for New Year's, it was always a big deal, you know, and people get dressed up in formal clothes. And there was a feeling of formality that was a little different. And from my own point of view, I remember there would be, they used to play what they called pie poker, which meant there was a limit. I think it was a $2 limit on how much you could lose. So, you know, it was a friendly game. But of course, after the game, there was their special, cakes, cookies, baked goods, and so on. And I remember Mr. Bloom, who was in the washer business, Cofield Washers. He didn't live in the East End, but he was a friend of my parents, and he always had a big cigar. And I always loved the smell of that cigar. And I come down the next morning, there were all the good leftovers and a lovely scent of cigar smoke in the air. Speaking of Jewish or non-Jews, there was an undercurrent of anti-Semitism that sometimes flared up. And I think most of us had our schoolyard fights. And, you know, they say you've got to be taught, and I think that's really true, because most of the kids who we associated with, or who insulted us in one way or another, or called us names, of course, they had never really associated with Jews other than us, and they were told by their parents, you know, this was a time when religion, especially the Christian religion, was, I mean, there was no question about, you were either a Christian or you were, the rest could be put into a very small pocket. There were no, I don't think there were any Muslims around at that time, and Jews formed a small proportion. So we had our problems and our fights, but on the other hand, I think, you know, weighing it all, I would say that I had a lot more experience of good friendship from the Gentile kids who I associated with. So it wasn't pervasive, but it was there under the surface.
Well, for a long time, Jews couldn't buy houses in Westdale.
That's true. That's true. And that was, it was part of the original, what do they call it, where they,
Restrictive covenant.
yeah, covenant, that's it. The covenant didn't allow Jews. I think that was broken by a man whose name I can't recall right now, but he wanted to buy a cottage up on Lake Huron. And there was a covenant there restricting the Jews, and he took it right through court. And the judge who ruled against these covenants became quite a hero to the Jewish people. So that was the end of these anti-Jewish covenants. But remembering, I don't want to dwell on anti-Semitism, but I remember things like beaches where there'd be a sign, no Jews allowed. And
Where in Hamilton?
I'm thinking of Bronte, actually.
Really?
Yes. So, it was a time of sort of establishing ourselves as people who didn't have horns, and we weren't going to be a threat to anybody, and but still, there was that feeling of antipathy towards Jews on the part of some people. I think people like Rabbi Baskin, who was really an ambassador to the non-Jewish community in this city, still is, did a lot to defuse that, He was always speaking to non-Jewish organizations, inviting them into the temple. And I don't doubt that he was out there, talking to people and explaining Judaism to them or bringing them into the temple several times a week. That was a big part of his job, yes.
Sure.
So, it's changed for the better.
I think so.